I tell my staff and my students that put the patient's interests first always, and you'll never have anything ever to worry about, ever.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, where I'm your host, Dr. Joey Weisler, and today's guest is Winston Meikle, who's a nurse leader, healthcare innovator, educator, and advocate whose work challenges us to rethink not only how we care for others, but how we also understand healing itself. With more than 40 years of experience spanning critical care, hospital administration, diagnostics, workforce development, and nursing education, Winston has dedicated his life to serving people on the front lines of vulnerability. But what makes his perspective especially compelling is his belief that healing extends far beyond medicine alone. His work explores the intersections of consciousness, compassion, awareness, and human presence, asking what becomes possible when care is rooted in the power of love. As the founder of initiatives like Mobile Lab Techs, the MLT School of Phlebotomy, and Love Care Partners, Winston's work bridges clinical science with holistic and deeply human approaches to wellness, advocacy, and transformation. And in today's conversation, we'll explore burnout, identity loss among caregivers and educators, survival mode, self-healing, and what it means to remain present for others without losing yourself in the process. So, Winston, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you and to be present with you and your audience. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. So Winston and I connected after Winston had a chance to listen to Ron Yap's segment on caregiving, burnout, and also the inner hero model. So we'll leave a link to Ron Yap's segment in here as well to also broaden the inspiration. So Winston, let's go ahead and start with your background in terms of the fact that you've spent several decades in healthcare and education. And we think about just the high intensity in all these different types of caregiving roles and caregiving environments. And in the introduction that you and I corresponded with, we were talking about just the ways that caregivers and educators start to operate in this survival mode mindset sometimes. And when they do that, they start to focus on surviving rather than also helping themselves. So tell us a little bit about your journey and where in your journey did you find either yourself or those around you operating in that sense of survival mode in a way that prevented them from mobilizing within themselves?
You know, as a nurse for 40 years, I've been experiencing nurse shortage scenarios where nurses are working short-staffed quite often. Nurses are being forced to forego their own personal standards of care to meet hospital standards for staffing ratios and patient input and patient interactions that are not quite ideal, not to their own personal nursing standards. And in some ways, nurses start to believe that they need to disconnect from their patients in order to be able to survive the scenario, where studies are now showing that the connection is the antidote for that type of a feeling. Compassion and acting on that compassion, connecting with your patients is the antidote for burnout in actuality. So that's my understanding, and that's been my approach for as long as I can remember. I often say to my colleagues and my patients that I have an infinitely renewable source of love that I can give away freely and never run out of, so I will give it away freely. So that is one of the things that keeps me going. It keeps me motivated, knowing that my work is more than just the mechanistic actions that I take. It's the interactions, it's the connections that we make that enables me to be effective in my role.
I get goosebumps hearing that because let me tell you a story about what happened in Parkland after Parkland. So for our listeners tuning in, I'm actually recording today a mile away from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which is home of the Parkland school tragedy in 2018. That was also my alma mater. And after that time, I started working there as well as an interim instructor at their feeder middle school. But what I was learning during that time from the high school itself at Stoneman Douglas is that after that tragedy had happened, that following school year, starting that August, when there was a new group of students coming in and there were new classes because it was a different school year, that fall, there were so many teachers who were so afraid, as you hinted to, Winston, to even look at their students in the eye. They really hesitated to build the partnerships that we required to sustain in education to make students feel successful. And when those teachers were asked, why are you feeling this way? They said, what if that student dies? And I felt so connected to them. What if we lose
Yeah,
more students? And because of that, I know in those caregiving roles as well, especially in nursing, it's very likely that from time to time you're going to end up losing patients. And
yeah.
that's something that these teachers were dealing with as well, where they were really hesitating to build bridges because of that fear that they had. So then one of the most powerful ideas that you've already mentioned as well on our podcast and in your work and in your book, we can talk about your book as well, is how real healing is driven by love, not by fear. So then in systems that are built around pressure, urgency, performance, and these caregiving roles, what had you design that philosophy in such a really practical sense, and how do you continue to follow it?
Understanding that in healthcare in general and nursing specifically, it's a fear-driven environment. It's where fear is the underlying orientation that people approach their work from. It starts very early on in education. I know in nursing education, nursing students are told that you're working very hard to earn your license. Don't do anything to cause you to lose your license. That's the first fear-based ideation that they're given. Then you be afraid of making a mistake. Be afraid of not doing something right. Be afraid for the outcomes of the patient. Just a fear-driven orientation. I know that a doctor I recently saw on a podcast mentioned that in his third year of med school, he's told to not care too much, not to connect, because that may cause him to have burnout. And in his research, he discovered that the antidote actually is to connect. So, in my educational experiences with the students, I take senior nursing students to the clinical setting, and my class is Transition to Professional Practice. That's the class that I teach. And I take nursing students who are now full of theoretical information, and I give them a practical experience in an actual hospital setting where they have their first opportunities to interact with patients. And when I meet them for the first time, I tell them in this classroom, we're going to abandon the fear based orientation that you've been steeped in your whole experience. And we're going to be practicing love based nursing, not fear based nursing. We're not going to fear the things that we don't want. We're not going to entertain those ideas at all. We're going to focus on the outcomes that we desire to create, focus on making a loving connection with our patients so that they will trust us and want to follow our directives as caregivers. And we're going to bring them our expertise and our intentions to bring about the best possible outcomes. And one of the models that I tell my students is no one cares what you know until they know that you care. And we take that approach. Okay, so we're going to make them fully aware that we care for them and that we're here for their best possible outcomes and that we're going to apply our expertise to achieve them. So that's the philosophy I live by. I live by that in all aspects of my life and my career as far as teaching and interacting with patients in the direct care scenarios as well.
Your message is going to land so unbelievably well with our audiences. I'm so excited to share it.
Mhm.
And one thing that really sticks with me is how you said, no one cares what you know until they know that you care. Because in education, I've come to learn that students, as a writing professor, don't always remember everything about language and stories and composition in the years following my class. And all of my teacher evaluations, the number one thing that I see is that students say, oh, he was easy to work with. He cared about us. He made the learning accommodating. He made it a process that was doable for a first-time freshman. I'm just composition 101 as a freshman instructor.
Um,
And these students are just looking for somebody to make them feel welcome and seen. And that's what they always say. Not that, oh, they learned so much about rhetoric. No, I almost never get that. They just say, thank you for giving us an instructor in our first semester who made me feel so welcome and visible to this university. And I love that you're also teaching a class just like that on that transition to professional practice, because we need more folks like you, Winston, who are instilling that value of care over fear. Because even in academia, now education was not my major. I was an English major. I was a communication major, but I still took a few courses in education to train to get the certification and whatnot. I had wonderful educators with wonderful courses during that time. I don't feel like none of them actually prepared me for being on the front lines of that job with everything that was unexpected thereafter, especially, which perhaps this happens in nursing as well. I would be surprised if it didn't. Taking on that role of a therapist instead of a caregiver and trying to stay in alignment with that boundary. So then, especially with the unexpected that comes up just by being on the field or in the field as well, what do you hope for your students to gain from the class that they take with you in training to
What
be a
do I
nurse?
hope that they gain?
Mhm.
Well, no, what I expect them to gain from
There
their
we go.
experience with me is
Mhm.
that they're going to be prepared to have good patient interactions when they're actually on their own on their first job, and they have to do it for real, as without any crutches or any supervision or any support. That they're going to be able to engage with their patients because that's one of the things I emphasize. First, there's the technical aspects of the role, which my focus for them was to do a very good head to toe physical assessment, where that's assessing all the bodily systems as well as the patient's cognitive state to
Mhm.
understand where they are. And then a good report where we give that information to the next person taking over care for this patient at the end of a shift. And if you do those two things well as a nurse, you'll be in a good professional standing, right? So those are the two things mechanistically that I focus on. But I always tell them, in order for you to be effective in your connection with your patients, you have to get inside their head, know who they are, understand their motivations, understand their fears, so that you can help to alleviate some of them. Make sure that you understand them, and when you communicate with them as much as you can in their vernacular as you possibly can so that they feel a connection. There are certain terms that someone might use and certain phrases that they might use. When you respond, don't approach them as I'm a professional nurse and you're going to use all this professional vernacular that may go over their head and they may not connect with. Speak to them in simple terms that they will understand, make the connection spiritually, emotionally, and heartfelt. This way you can have them follow your guidance. Because as nurses, we are also therapists. That's not an extension of our role. That is part of our role. That's core to our role. We're therapeutic in our communication. Our communication should be therapeutic, where we're listening to understand, not to respond, where we're listening to find out what's at the root of their communication. What are they trying to actually communicate? Because sometimes someone will say something addressing a concern, and the root of it is actually fear or anxiety. Or they may something that may be offensive or abrasive, and the root of it is actually fear and anxiety. And we have to see past the abrasive first glance and get to the root of where is this coming from. This person is fearful, concerned about their family at home. They're concerned about their future. They're concerned about their job. There's so many different concerns when you're a patient in the hospital or engaging with healthcare. There is a loss of agency as well, where you come in and now you've lost yourself to the system, and then you're just at the mercy of this institution. You get the food when they serve it to you. You may need help to get to the bathroom. There's so much loss of agency that it's steeped in anxiety and fear. So we want to alleviate that as much as possible. Just try and minimize it to any degree that we can. So that's where I teach my students to focus on connecting with the patient, getting to the heart of the matter.
I never realized how similar schools and hospitals, if you will, are in the sense that you have patients or students that have such limited agency and really
Mm.
are at the mercy of the people trying to connect with them. And you mentioned another theme that we speak about often in this podcast as well, where classrooms and doctors' offices and hospitals, right, should be therapeutic. And in education, we use that word with caution that a classroom should be therapeutic for students. And we have to be very careful as educators by blurring the boundaries into becoming therapy for students. And so then in nursing, Tell us how that boundary sustains itself, if it needs to, where you mentioned that being a therapist is kind of a part of the role, but not really an extension thereof. So then, what are some boundaries that you talk about having nurses, whether it's with yourself or your colleagues or your students? What are some boundaries that nurses should uphold when taking on that role of a caregiver?
When you say boundaries, there's professional boundaries that, we have to maintain our professionalism with regard to
Mhm.
how we interact with them. At the same time, you don't want to be too rigid. You don't want to be Nurse Ratchet, that nurse that,
Right. The cuckoo's nest.
you know what I mean? So there's a fine balance that you have to find, and you have to identify who you're dealing with first. When you make that connection, how to speak to them, how to respond to them, what would be sensitive to them in their history, from what you know about their history and their diagnosis and their family dynamics. You try to understand where that line is. Sometimes that line is a very blurred designation of what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. I tend to overstep my bounds quite a bit. Now, when I say overstep my bounds, I forego the professional stiffness to just be as natural and authentic as I possibly can. I just connect with them from an authentic place. And that seems to work well for me. It works
Mhm.
well in most settings. And that's what I try to come across in the book that I produced, to be authentic and understand that the world that we're living in is not just mechanistic world that we've been taught. There's more going on than what is obvious to us in our visual and sensual understandings. There's energetic reality that we exist in that transcends that mechanistic world. So we have to make sure that we understand that your presence energetically matters as well. So that boundary, it's a very blurred boundary for me. I don't try to find a boundary. I try to find how I can transcend the boundary and get a deeper connection.
So then how do you find that other practitioners are working to maintain that balance? Let's call it a balance instead of a boundary, because I
Balance is
think that's what it
probably
sounds like.
is a probably better term.
Yeah. How do you find that other nurse practitioners are trying to navigate that balance without facing burnout? Because a lot of your work focuses on that professional burnout. So tell us about that a little bit.
Well, I think that a lot of people are very protective of themselves,
Hmm.
you know, and I tell my nurses all the time that when you interact with the patient, as long as you put the patient's interest first, you'll always be okay. No matter what happens, if you even have an adverse event, if you can demonstrate that you're acting in the patient's best interest, you will always be okay. A lot of times, nurses will act in a self-protective manner in their interactions, and that's their way of keeping that balance, where they say, okay, I'll be professional and I'll protect myself from damage at the same time, where that loses me. I don't agree with that approach at all, and I discourage it as well. I tell my staff and my students that put the patient's interests first always, and you'll never have anything ever to worry about, ever. So that balance for me always leans towards patient-centered care and giving the patients the most that I can give them. Other practitioners are very self-protective. They act in a way, I'm going to do my job, but I'm going to do my job in a way that keeps me safe instead of giving the patient their most.
Yeah. In my first year of teaching, and I've shared this story several times and on several threads throughout the podcast as well. My career was actually jeopardized because of how much I was working to care for students as well. And I look back and I'm like, you know what? Those students who I really went to admin for, I fought them to their face. And I said to admin, I know I'm new. I'm a first year teacher, but you will listen to me. They didn't listen
Yeah.
to me. They fired me. But I said to them, you
but
will listen to me.
but you know what?
And
I
and
don't
I
blame you for acting in your students'
exactly.
interest. That's I
And
don't,
yep,
if that's the cost, then that's the cost because that's what it's
exactly. Yep.
for. You
And
know.
I look back, that was 7 years ago. I look back and I say, thank goodness I did it that way because I didn't get it right that time. I
Mhm.
didn't. But two students still talk to me to this day. They are now in college. They
Yeah,
still talk to me. One of them actually is going into medicine. And what they remember is how much I cared for them during that time. And that's what
absolutely,
matters more to me than
absolutely,
anything else. If I still had that job and I didn't care, what would I have been doing for the past 7 years? The fact that I
exactly.
know that those two students remember that I cared was worth, and I would fight that same fight again and
How much
again
of
and
yourself
again.
would you have lost in not taking that approach? How much of yourself would you have given up in order to take a more
Mm-hmm.
self-protective approach? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's the thought that I keep. Like, am I being true to myself? Am I being authentic? And
Mm-hmm.
authentic is the highest vibrational state that we can be in, right? Even more so
Mm-hmm.
than love, right? Being authentic.
Absolutely.
So How much of yourself would you have lost? How much have you given up if you wouldn't have stood your ground in your acting in their best interest?
Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of patient-centered care, and I completely advocate for it because in that sense of, like you mentioned, when we do care for the patients, there might be things that happen to us in our career, but at least we know that the people we're working to serve will be okay. We'll be okay because our patients will be okay. And that's what I've
Exactly the
learned.
point I was trying to make.
Yep, 7 years, and that's my point as well. 7 years later, I'm okay because I know those students are okay. And that was the goal. And like I said, I didn't get it right that
No,
first
I
time.
mean, there's
And I
no,
didn't have to. I didn't
you
have
know,
to. Hmm.
yes, you didn't have to. You were acting from a love-based approach and a caring approach to create the best possible outcomes for these students that you could.
Exactly. So then let's talk about the power of love and nursing theory. And tell us a little bit more about what got you to write the book, who's looking at it now, and what's the premise of it?
Okay, well, it started long ago. I mean, it's a very convoluted history, but I'll start from the very, very beginning.
Yes.
I was a young man and I made observations that there were certain phenomena that took place that I felt were outside of the normal conventional explanations. Now, it's outside of the conventional mechanistic view of the world that we hold, right? There were some serendipitous experiences that were like, whoa, that is not normal, but wow, it's just a mental note. Mental note, okay, just remember that. More than one that defied conventional wisdom, conventional explanation. And then I made an observation that a lot of the people that we see who are successful in their endeavors, either by in sports or business or entertainment, that they have a certain confidence factor, that they believe in their success well before they achieve it. They called it. I'm gonna name drop. Biz Markie is the rapper that recently passed away. I've known him since we were in high school, and he was not the most likely to succeed person. He was probably the far extreme to the other side, not looking like he could possibly because he was not the most put together person. But he was insistent, I'm going to make a record. I'm going to make a record. I'm making a record. I'm making a record, making a record. And we're like, yeah, 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 whatever. Yeah, whatever. Sure, Biz. Sure. Yes, sure you are. Sure you are. And before too long, he was on the radio. And if you knew him as I knew him, he was not that guy, but he spoke it into existence. And he put forth the work and effort and energy to it. But he was not the most likely to succeed person in my experience. That's just one small experience. That's it. But there are several others that I can refer to, but it would take up too much time. But in that experience, I started to name it the confidence factor and taught it to my younger brother. And when he was endeavoring in sports in high school, and I pointed out things that we saw together that demonstrated that there was forces in action that are not widely accepted, I would say, but are hard to deny. And then as a nurse, I started seeing things like that at the bedside, where unexpected, what we call miracles, or what we call happenstance, or coincidences, and I would make mental notes of that. And then I learned of quantum physics, and I heard of the quantum physics double slit experiment and what that suggested. And that suggested that mind over matter is a real thing from the observer effect and then quantum entanglement. And I said, whoa, that may be an explanation for some of these phenomena I experienced and observed. So I started to make the connections in my mind. And then I said, you know what? When I speak to nurses, every nurse that you talk to will have one of those type of anecdotal stories to tell about some miraculous occurrence that happened with them and a patient or with them and a patient's family, or some form of happenstance, coincidence, minor miracle. Everyone has one. And I'm like, okay, maybe the observer effect has something to do with this. And then I said, okay, all right, you know what? I believe it. I'm going to put it together in a theory based around this belief. And in so doing, I was saying that maybe 12 years ago, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And over that time, I kept finding more and more confirming evidence. Heart Math Institute information that the heart is a second brain and it transmits energy to a field of 6 feet outside of our bodies. One of the nursing theorists that I follow is named Martha Rogers. and her a science of unitary being, where the patient and the nurse and the environment are energetic fields that overlap, and that kind of supported this ideation as well. And I said, you know what? There's enough here to form a nursing theory, to form a new approach to care delivery that instead of having these things happen incidentally, we could have them happen purposefully by using this understanding and operating from this perspective that there is a greater force at play. And then my ideations that we're in an energetic reality and we're energetic beings in an intelligent, conscious, loving universe, that we should be acting in that understanding. We should be approaching how we interact with our patients and how we deliver our care from that perspective and using it purposefully instead of having it happen incidentally because we're not aware that we're doing it. But see, now we make ourselves aware that we are doing it and we have this ability to influence our world outside of our bodies from our loving intention, from our loving perspectives, and that's just how we came together. And that's had other forms of evidence, scientific support for it. So it's not just my feeling or my ideations, it's supported by advanced sciences. And what I also came to understand is that ancient traditions also spoke of this. And now advanced sciences are now demonstrating the validity of those ancient wisdom traditions. What was being said millennia ago is now being discovered in advanced scientific exploration. So it's not my woo theory, it's scientifically based perspective.
And I love the idea of just being intentional about how we approach our feelings as well. So
Yes.
then, this has been wonderful. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because, again, it's two completely different fields, but the connection is to the role of caregiving. So it really is just one body of human endeavors trying to care for other people. And we have so much respect for all of our practitioners that are out there. So, as we come to the end of our conversation, two things to ask. My first question is there anything that I haven't asked you yet today that would resonate with our listeners? And my second question is, what is a final piece of wisdom that you would hope for listeners to resonate with, whether that they are teachers or caregivers, wanting to just remain compassionate and filled with love?
Okay. First of all, we could have delved deeper into the energetic reality. That's one thing that I would like for your audience to understand, that we are
Yeah,
energetic beings in an energetic universe. And we have an energetic field of love that is underlying all that exists, right? And we should be understanding and approach our endeavors from the understanding that we do have the ability. Our mind over matter is a real thing, scientifically proven. Okay, there's a few experiments that I can refer to. Poex chicken and robot experiment, Dr. Masaru Emoto's water experiments, the random numbers generator experiments. There's a few others, but we'll save those. But that's scientific support for the understanding. Dr. Anton Zellinger's Nobel Prize winning experiments using quasar light from stars that demonstrate that settled the debate between Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein as to the nature of our reality, and it confirmed that we're in a quantum reality, not a mechanistic particle physics reality as expressed by Albert Einstein. So understand that you're an energetic being, your thoughts matter, your intentions matter, the words that you use matter, and when you refer to yourself and others, and approach everything from love first perspective. In any interaction that you may have or experience, regardless if it's pleasant or unpleasant, the most loving response will always be the best response.
it's
And that's it.
beautiful. Thank you for that. Are you familiar with the work of Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score?
No, I'm not. I'll take a
Mm,
look at that.
I will definitely have to send you a link to that. So
Please.
Bessel van der Kolk he's actually in the field of trauma. So my whole background is in trauma studies. And I look at psychoanalysis and the mind, human behavior in the aftermath of trauma. And what van der Kolk says is that the body reacts to what the brain is thinking and feeling. And so when people have those visible PTSD reactions, it's really just a response from what their brain is processing and going through.
Yes, absolutely. Heart math, gut math. Your gut is another brain. And there are more neurological connections to your heart than there are to your brain in a lot of ways. So your hypothalamus. your body's internal pharmacy that creates all the drugs that you could possibly need to survive. And it's really inactivated by emotions, right? So every emotion is not just a thought, it's a physical condition, it's a physical state because there are certain chemicals that exist during that emotion that identifies that emotion. So when you're having an emotional response, it's not just a thought, it's a physical state of being because of the chemicals that are in place in your body that are produced and are existing in that body. So that's something that the chemical condition can bring about the emotional condition,
Mhm.
and then vice versa. So it's an interplay, and your emotions are a source of chemical production in your body.
Yes, I love that idea, that like that internal pharmacy. I think that's a powerful metaphor as well.
Yeah.
And any final thoughts for listeners for today? Where can they learn more about you?
Well, we have Mobile Lab Techs is a mobile clinical diagnostic services organization. The healthcare industry for decades has been talking about decentralizing care, where they take the care out of the hospital setting and bring it out into the community. And I started Mobile Lab Techs to fulfill that desire, where our mottos are bringing the diagnostic services you need to the locations that you want. And for providers, our motto is don't send your patients to the labs, send the labs to your patients.
Mm.
Okay. And second company that for more Loving Care Partners is a healthcare consumer advocacy company that is about to launch in the end of June. It's a healthcare consumer advocacy platform where we help people to be better consumers of healthcare services through information, education, and guidance, helping them to know what are the best questions to ask, how to interact with your caregivers, what to expect in a hospital setting, what to expect during certain procedures, what is your role in your recovery. I often tell patients in my experience as a cardiac surgery intensive care unit nurse that your recovery is not something that happens to you. Your recovery is something that you do. It's not a passive endeavor, it's an active endeavor. You have to be actively participating in your recovery in order for it to be at its best outcome. So that's one of the things I always want to tell my patients. Don't wait for something to happen, you make it happen.
And we'll also have a link to the Power of Love Theory website in our show notes as well.
Yes.
So
powerlovetheory.com. And that's where you can find my book. This book is a book written for nurses primarily, but all healthcare providers who are in direct patient care scenarios. I help them guide them in their patient interactions. But I'm now writing another book that's just about complete, that is a public facing version of the same book, providing the same theories to the public for them to take on this information from the other side of the equation, speaking to them to be better consumers of healthcare, better patients, how to maximize the experience to their best outcomes, and then following that up with a parenting book and some children's books to help guide people into this ideation of their energetic reality and how they can manifest more for themselves through intentions and positive thinking and actions and love-based approach.
it's beautiful. There's two people I'm going to want to introduce you to. And after we conclude the segment, I'll tell you exactly who they are because I think that you're going to get along really, really well with them. And we will also love to invite you back when those books are ready, that we can help promote them and share them and help them publicize for you a little bit.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Joey.
My pleasure. So that was Winston Meikle joining us on the Classroom Narratives podcast for a conversation on healing, compassion, identity, and what it means to care for others while still caring for ourselves. And what I appreciate most about Winston's perspective is the reminder that healing is not about trying to fix a problem. It's about being aware of it, showing presence, building connections, and reclaiming parts of ourselves before they get lost in the service to others. If you find that this conversation resonated with you, please consider sharing the episode with an educator, a healthcare worker, a caregiver, or anyone navigating burnout, purpose, and the search for balance in helping professions. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and a big thank you to Winston for joining us here on the Classroom Narratives podcast.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.